Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a health crisis that is often kind of lurking beneath the surface of the headlines: heart failure or HF.
Right.
And this is an immense, really complex medical challenge. We're talking about 1 to 2% of the entire global adult population, and the growth projections, they're alarming.
They really are. We're looking at a potential 46% increase in just a couple of decades, from 2012 to 2030.
Wow.
But here's the hopeful part, the thing that really brings this into focus. Lifestyle changes. They have the potential to reduce about 75% of all cardiovascular disease-related deaths.
75%, that's huge. That means diet isn't just a side note.
Not at all. It holds massive therapeutic power.
Absolutely. So what specific diets deliver that power? That's our mission today. We are digging into a powerful 2025 meta-analysis that compared the two heavyweights, the Mediterranean diet and the DHH diet.
And this analysis is robust. I mean, the scale is impressive. It pulled together data from 16 reports, 14 different studies.
And how many people are we talking about?
Over 424,000 participants. And they're from all over Spain, the U.S., Sweden. It gives us a really broad perspective.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our goal here is to figure out the influence of these two diets, but we need to separate the findings, right?
Exactly. We have to split it into two buckets. First, primary prevention. That's reducing the risk of getting heart failure in the first place.
And second.
And second, secondary prevention. So for patients who already have an HF diagnosis, what helps reduce all-cause mortality?
Perfect. To begin, let's make sure we're all on the same page. We hear ME and DASH all the time, but what are the core differences? Let's start with DASH.
Okay, so DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. Its whole reason for being is to lower blood pressure.
Sounds very targeted.
Very. It emphasizes fruits, vegetables, whole grains, poultry, fish, nuts, and specifically low-fat dairy. And the things it scores negatively are, what you'd expect. Red and processed meats, sugary drinks, and the big one, sodium.
So it's kind of the rigorous engineer of the dietary world, very focused on sodium, fat, blood pressure.
That's a great way to put it.
How does the Mediterranean diet stack up against that?
Well, it shares that same foundation. Plant-based foods, fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains. But its signature is really the generous use of heart-healthy oils, like olive oil.
And what else sets it apart?
The other key difference is the inclusion of moderate dairy. And this is the controversial part for some, moderate amounts of alcohol as a positive scoring element.
Right, the glass of wine with dinner.
Exactly. Usually around 10 to 25 grams a day for men, a bit less for women. And like DHH, it negatively scores red meat, but also dairy, and drinking more than that moderate amount of alcohol.
So two very distinct patterns. But I imagine comparing data across all these different studies and countries couldn't have been easy.
Oh, not at all. And that's where the methodology gets really complex. The analysts had to grapple with the fact that these weren't uniform studies.
What do you mean?
Well, they were all using different scoring systems. Some used a 14-point MED score. Others used something called AMED, or a standard DSH score. And the follow-up periods were all over the map.
How varied.
We're talking from just over 2 years in one study all the way up to 21 and a half years in another.
Wow. So trying to standardize that data into one analysis sounds like a huge job.
A monumental undertaking. And it's important context to keep in mind as we look at the results.
That context is vital. Okay, let's jump into the findings for that first big question. Primary prevention. This is for everyone out there who does not have a heart failure diagnosis. Which diet is better?
Well, the good news is both showed remarkable success here. High adherence to the DHH diet. It showed a clear, significant inverse relationship with the risk of getting HF. The odds ratio was 0.83.
Okay, let's pause there. For our listeners who aren't reading research papers every day, break down what an odds ratio of 0.83 actually means in plain English.
Sure. An odds ratio just shows the probability of something happening. In this case, developing heart failure compared to a control group. An OR of 1.0 means no difference.
So less than 1 is good.
Exactly. When you see 0.83, it means the people who stuck closely to the DAH diet had about a 17% lower risk of developing a new case of heart failure.
17%. That's a massive finding.
It is.
And what about the Mediterranean diet? How did it do on primary prevention?
It also did really well. In fact, it showed a slightly stronger statistical association. High adherence had a significant inverse relationship with an OR of 0.77.
So that's a 23% reduction in risk.
That's right.
So the immediate takeaway here is that if you're looking to prevent heart failure from ever starting, following either of these patterns is highly effective. The med diet maybe has a slight statistical edge, but both are winners.
Both are powerful preventative tools. But now we have to pivot to the scenario where we see the real split between these two diets.
Right. And this next finding is so critical for the thousands of people who are already living with HF. We're now talking about secondary prevention, the impact of these diets on all-cause mortality. Does it still matter what you eat?
This is where it gets really interesting and where the diets diverge. For patients with an existing HF diagnosis, high adherence to the Mediterranean diet was associated with lower all-cause mortality.
And the numbers.
We saw an OR of 0.88. That indicates a clear, statistically significant benefit for survival. And, importantly, the studies looking at this were highly consistent with each other.
So a solid finding. What happened when they looked at the DHH diet in the same scenario?
For DHH, the analysis found no significant association between high adherence and all-cause mortality in these patients.
No significant link at all.
Well, the OR was 0.89, so, very close to the med diet's number, but the p-value was 0.15.
Let's talk about that p-value. A p-value of 0.15 basically means the result wasn't strong enough for researchers to be confident it wasn't just due to random chance, right?
That's the perfect way to put it. The data isn't strong enough yet to make a definitive clinical claim based on this analysis alone.
So the crucial distinction is this. For managing established heart failure, only the Mediterranean diet provided statistically significant evidence of reducing mortality risk in this meta-analysis.
That's the bottom line.
I have to say, that feels a little counterintuitive. DHH is so focused on things like sodium and blood pressure, which seem vital for managing HF. Why do you think it fell short where the med diet succeeded?
That's a great question, and it probably comes down to the underlying mechanisms. DHH is excellent at tackling hypertension, a primary risk factor. But the Mediterranean diet seems to be superior at tackling things like chronic inflammation and oxidative stress.
Which are the drivers of the disease after it's already started.
Exactly. It's almost like DHH is the engineer that prevents the problem, but MED is the holistic inflammation manager you need for long-term management.
Okay, if that's the case, let's dive into the specifics. The subgroup analysis must be really telling. What foods are actually driving these effects?
It is, because it helps us isolate what's doing the heavy lifting.
Right.
So looking at primary prevention first, reducing that initial risk-high consumption of two things really stood out.
What were they?
Fruits and legumes. Both were strongly linked to a reduced risk.
Okay, that makes sense.
But then there was the finding that surprised a lot of people. Moderate alcohol intake also showed a protective effect against the risk of incident HF.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying that in this huge analysis, moderate alcohol, a hallmark of the med diet, showed a protective effect?
Yes.
While other cornerstones, like vegetables and fish, did not show a statistically significant link for prevention in that same analysis?
It's highly counterintuitive, I know. And it's probably a function of correlation, or maybe just how the individual studies scored things. But yes, statistically, for preventing HF, it was fruits, legumes, and moderate alcohol that stood out.
That is fascinating. So what about secondary prevention? Reducing mortality in patients who already have HF. Do the key foods change?
They absolutely do. And it's a dramatic shift. For patients already living with HF, high consumption of vegetables was significantly linked to reduced mortality.
Okay, so vegetables are key for management.
Yes. And maybe even more tellingly, less dairy consumption was also associated with reduced mortality risk.
Interesting. And what about sodium?
Surprisingly, low sodium intake did not show a significant impact on all-cause mortality risk in this specific analysis.
That is a huge insight. The foods that help prevent the disease are different from the foods that help manage it. Let's get into the how. What are these diets doing at a cellular level?
It's really a multi-pronged attack on cell damage. Both diets are just packed with anti-inflammatory and antioxidant compounds. They're high in polyphenols, things like hydroxytyrosol from olive oil, which directly reduce oxidative stress.
So they're turning down the volume on chronic inflammation, but how?
They do it by inhibiting key inflammatory pathways. You can think of chronic inflammation as having an on switch in your cells. That switch is often a protein complex called NFB. These diets, rich in antioxidants, physically suppress the activation of NF-key. They basically help keep that switch in the off position, preventing the downstream damage we see in heart disease.
That makes the process so much clearer.
And beyond that, you have the healthy fats in the MED diet. The monounsaturated fatty acids, MUFAs, and omega-3s are crucial for vascular health. They improve the health of the inner lining of your blood vessels and reduce the adhesion molecules that let plaque build up.
And what about the specific compounds that might give the med diet that edge in reducing mortality?
Well, the sources pointed to a few things. The med diet helps address obesity, which is a big risk factor for certain types of heart failure. And its anti-inflammatory effects were also thought to improve how the heart relaxes and fills, something called diastolic function, which is key for a common type of HF.
And resveratrol, I know we hear about that a lot.
Yes, resveratrol, the polyphenol from grapes and red wine, was specifically cited for its potent antioxidant effects, for improving left ventricular function and reducing fibrosis or scarring in the heart.
This evidence is overwhelmingly positive, but we have to acknowledge the limitations. So what context do our listeners need to keep in mind here?
First and foremost, we have to go back to that statistical inconsistency we mentioned. In the DAS diet findings for incident HF, the analysts found substantial heterogeneity, an I-squared value of 80%.
80% is massive. That means even though the overall finding was a 17% risk reduction, the individual studies were really all over the place.
Precisely. It makes that overall number a little less reliable. And that often stems from the study design itself. These were all observational cohort studies.
Meaning they just watched people over time. They didn't have them change their diet.
Exactly. So the results are prone to bias and confounding factors.
You mean things that often go along with a healthy diet but aren't the diet itself, like having more money or exercising more?
Precisely. The studies couldn't always account for those other variables. And then there's the global applicability problem.
Right. These were all done in high-income countries.
Yes. Sweden, the U.S., Spain. So we have to be careful generalizing these findings to low and middle income countries where food access and affordability are completely different issues.
So to recap this deep dive, we've got some crystal clear, actionable takeaways, but they require nuance. Big picture. If you're looking to prevent heart failure, both the med and DSH diets are highly effective.
Right.
But if you have an established diagnosis of heart failure, high adherence to the Mediterranean diet gives you a statistically significant benefit in reducing all-cause mortality, a claim the DSH data in this analysis couldn't confirm.
And remember those key components: fruits, legumes, and surprisingly moderate alcohol for prevention.
Yeah.
And a focus on vegetables and less dairy for better mortality outcomes if you already have HF.
And this is where the nuance gets really challenging, and it leaves us with a provocative final thought. The analysis pointed out that moderate alcohol consumption, specifically wine, was associated with a protective effect against getting HF in the first place.
But, and this is a big but, the study also acknowledged that the way alcohol intake was measured across all these different studies was inconsistent and not very comprehensive.
So this raises a really important question for you, the listener, to consider. Given the nuanced and sometimes conflicting data on a single component, like moderate alcohol, versus the overwhelming proven benefit of the overall dietary pattern.
Which is clearly greater than the sum of its parts.
Exactly. How should you weigh adopting one specific, seemingly protective food item against the robust evidence for adhering to the whole tested lifestyle model? Something to chew on as you consider your next meal plan.